Welcome to Japanese History for Everyone, where we are currently taking a deep dive into the circumstances that led to the fall of the Tokugawa Bakufu. This is our last video in the series, so we'll be talking about the last major reason for the fall of the Tokugawa Bakufu, and that is Western influence. Yes, I know, I created this series on the premise that it wasn't solely the arrival of the Americans that ended the Tokugawa Bakufu, but it did play a role, and I would be wrong if I said it wasn't. I just wanted to bring up everything else first, so that you can see how much of what led to the fall of the Tokugawa Bakufu happened way before foreigners were even part of the equation. That said, let's go over what happened. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Japan with the goal of opening the country's ports up to American trade. Perry arrived with 4 large black ships, and the Japanese initially surrounded these ships, but Commodore Perry threatened force if they did not back down, so they dispersed. After some back and forth, they finally allowed the Americans to port and come ashore. After some overdramatic pomp and circumstance and more threats, Commodore Perry told the Japanese their intentions and said they would come back in 1 year, expecting a positive response. The Japanese were very indecisive during this year and divided on how to respond. There was much debate, and for a very long time they could not come to an agreement. But when Commodore Perry arrived the following year, they had little over twice the amount of ships they had brought the first time. The Japanese government felt they had no choice but to accept the demands of the Americans. But as you could imagine, the treaties that they were forced to sign were incredibly unequal, and the common people were appropriately upset. Many found the acceptance of these treaties as proof of the Tokugawa government's weak leadership. Followers of Mito ideology felt that it was further proof that the emperor should be restored to power, particularly because Emperor Kome was very vocal about opposition to opening up to the West and his distaste for anything foreign. In 1863, Emperor Kome even proclaimed his order to expel the barbarians, which of course the shogunate ignored, but the people rallied around, inspiring several attacks against foreigners and foreign ships. The rallying cry "Son no Joi" of anti-Tokugawa allies of course meant revere the emperor, but also expel the barbarian. Barbarians, because their strange customs and strange ways, were met with disgust by the Japanese people, and there were even stereotypes that the Western man stole blood and drank it for fun. This of course because many Western medical practices included taking blood from their patients, and because red wine kinda looked like blood if you didn't know what it was. Anyway, the hope was that, with foreign barbarians and foreign ideas pushed out of Japan, Japan could then focus on their own internal, economic, social, and political issues, as explained in the previous videos. But even after the emperor was restored to power, Japan did choose to embrace Western culture and modernize along Western lines. And that's because not everybody was against the arrival of the West per se. Many felt that Japan would have to become a modern civilization so that it could maintain its sovereignty and avoid falling victim to Western colonization. But that's a whole nother story that could be used to make another series. So now that this series has reached its end, let's go over the 6 main reasons that the Tokugawa Bakufu collapsed. Number 1. Poor economic choices that failed to address the rise of the money economy and led to a social crisis where the merchants were able to amass a lot of wealth at the expense of everybody else. Number 2. Lower and middle-ranking samurai were removed from their lands and forced to rely on a small stipend of rice, which they then used to pay the merchants in order to afford a living. They also were forced to take out loans from those same merchants and accrued a lot of debt. In the end, these samurai were unhappy with their positions in society and the leadership that made them that way. Number 3. Upper-ranking samurai were often corrupt, accepting bribes from merchants in exchange for cash and spending it in the pleasure quarters of the cities. Number 4. Peasants were often exploited, being forced to pay higher taxes during a period of famine, and often having to turn to begging in the cities in order to survive. 5. A lack of faith in the Tokugawa government to solve the social, economic, and political issues being faced by the common people led to people wanting more benevolent rule, which turned them towards a desire to restore the emperor to sovereignty. And number 6, Western influence in Japan further whittled down the people's faith in the Tokugawa government to provide strong leadership. And this is where we're going to end things for now. But if you do have any questions, thoughts, or anything you want to add, please let me know. As a reminder, these videos are meant to be overviews of the topic at hand, and such, there are so much more things you can learn on your own about the same time period. If you're interested, please read the books and articles that I used for my resources if you want more information. Also, there'll be more series in the future, so stay tuned. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions.